There we go.
And let's do like that.
I don't
Let's go
know.
like
I
that.
think it's like that.
Great.
hmm
So, what is your name? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Beryl. My name is Beryl. I am a native Brooklynite, an artist. I work with glass, I work with film, photography, and as well as a podcaster.
What year did you? Were you always in Fort Greene?
Well, I was in Fort Greene about 1989. I had moved from Clinton Hill to a three-bedroom apartment on South Oxford Street with my teenage twins, Corin and Aaron.
Tell me a little bit about moving in for the first time into South Oxford.
Well, the apartment on South Oxford, I've always been blessed with having very nice, really pretty large apartments. So I moved from a three-bedroom duplex to a three-bedroom simplex. However, the two bedrooms that my twins shared were identical in size and closet space, so there could never be any issues. One of the best things about this apartment was it had two bathrooms, and I had my own private bathroom and a huge bedroom.
Great. Tell me a little bit about the neighborhood when you moved in. What were your first impressions?
Well, actually, I was coming from East New York originally into Clinton Hill. So, East New York back then was drug infested. A lot of people on crack. The development I lived in, there were a lot of people selling drugs. So we, I think, had the first helicopters overhead. So moving out of that environment to downtown, what I call downtown Brooklyn, Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, was a step up from East New York. However, it was still crime ridden at that point. Um, I remember having to drop to the floor on many occasions because of gun shooting outside of the building, and so it was still a little rough in Fort Greene when I moved in, but it was still better than from where we came from. I think the schools were better. My kids went to junior high school 113 Ronald Emmons. No, Ronald. Oh, forget that. They went to 113, and when we moved to South Oxford, they were already in high school. So, but it was a much better environment.
So tell me a little bit about walking into Ralph's the first time you ever walked in there.
Well, in moving into the neighborhood, it was like the only grocery store that had signage outside in terms of items on sale. And I was always a smart shopper, and I always looked for sales. So if I saw 6 cans of string beans, I would go in there and buy 6 cans of string beans. And none of the other small grocery or bodegas had that on their window. So, and then going in there was a rather crowded store, which also meant to me that their produce or whatever they were selling was probably fresher than where you didn't see people going in and out a lot of. So that was my first impression of going to Ralph's.
What was your first impression of him? When was the first time you ever saw him?
Well, I just felt that he was just another crazy Palestinian or Muslim store owner because that's who most of the store owners were back then. And he was very boisterous, and he told a lot of jokes, some that I didn't find quite so funny at the time, but I I eventually got a sense of who he really was after going there many times.
What was the first year you ever went in there, do you
It
think?
was probably 1989 when I moved into South Oxford.
Great. Um, And tell me, as you kept going there, you kept visiting, doing your shopping. How did you get to know him better? Like, what was that?
Well, what happened was in going there a lot, I had said to him one day that I might need credit, store credit, to buy some groceries from time to time, and I wanted to ask him in advance. And when I spoke to him about it, I was very quiet. I quietly brought it to his attention so anybody else in the store wouldn't really hear me. So we were on the far end of the store, and I remember telling him that I was going to truly be probably one of his best friends and someone he could trust almost more than anybody else he knew. And he laughed. And then after he left, he said, okay, sure, what is it that you need? So from that point on, I could always get store credit. I always made sure I paid him back. And eventually, we got to get to the point where if I needed cash, I could ask him for it, and then I would pay him back. Many years later, our friendship had gotten stronger and stronger. He had bought some properties, and I eventually also became one of his tenants in one of his buildings. And he would sometimes call me at night, and we would talk sometimes for like an hour, just talking over things that have happened in his life at the time that he needed to talk to someone about.
Like what? Like an example.
Well, an example might be a relationship he may be having with a particular person, a woman, and it could be it could have been any number of things that we talked about. But he trusted my judgment because I am older than him, and I've experienced a lot. I was also once involved with real estate, so he could come to me if he had any questions about a building or if he was in search of something. I would also help him, do the research or whatever.
Great. One of the things that I find that this was talked about when I went to this Black Owned Brooklyn thing. The idea of like, yeah, he was a bodega owner, grocery store owner. But so often those places actually, because he's a part of the neighborhood, the kids hang out there. When you
Right.
think about like him being a part of the community, yes, that store is called a bodega, but the reality is like what other services or how else has he been able through the years, through the decades, be a support system for families, for people in the
Well,
neighborhood?
in Ralph's store, because he was always well liked, he did a lot of different types of favors for people in the neighborhood. And since he was so well liked, a lot of times the restaurant owners would bring him like maybe a lot of food. It might be a whole little pan full of chicken and rice, or rice and beans, or whatever nationality of food they were selling. And anyone that was in his store at the time, he would give them some of that food. So if somebody was even really hungry, they could come there and he would make them a sandwich or offer them some type of food because they were hungry. In terms of people who had children who needed them to meet somewhere in the neighborhood, it would usually be Ralph's. A lot of kids liked him, babies liked him, so that's usually a sign of good trust if babies take to you. So a lot of parents would say, okay, meet your brother or whoever at Ralph's, and they would just wait there for them. And if you needed a package delivered and you didn't trust your own mailbox, you could ask Ralph, would he let someone deliver a package there for you? So, and he would do that too. It's like a lot of different things he would go out of his way. I remember there was a woman that lived in the building on Lafayette Avenue who was in a wheelchair and she couldn't get down the stairs. Something had happened in her building. He went upstairs and carried her down. So you could count on him to do a lot of things. And this is with Benadryl.
Yeah, crazy, right? As we talked about and we've discussed like this a little bit, like the whole idea of what happened more recently with this arrest and what went down. Tell me a little bit from your perspective what went down. How'd you hear about it? What happened?
Well, I was actually trying to reach him by telephone that day when the police busted him in his store. But unbeknownst to me, I was trying to reach him like several hours before I was going to the store. I think I either needed him to cash a check for me or he had some money for me where he had cashed a check. And no one ever picked up the phone, which was very unusual. So I worked in the neighborhood, and on my way home, I stopped by the store to see what had happened, and to get whatever it was, and that's when I saw everybody outside. They weren't directly outside of his store; they were across the street at the bar called Moe's, because they had outdoor seating, so everybody was seated around there. And I went across, and they told me that he was arrested for, I believe, selling marijuana to an undercover policeman. And his father came, his brother came. We were just all talking about, what the next steps should be. Do you have an attorney? Do you need an attorney? What happened?
No, I'm just making sure that it's still recording.
Oh, let's see.
Yeah, great. Um, and what was the reaction of the people in the neighborhood when they heard about this?
Well, it was different types of reactions. For the people that liked Ralph and were longtime friends of his, they had said that, well, whatever happened, he just needed an attorney and needed some representation in terms of, his rights. There were other people who, and it became very nasty. There were a couple of people, one person who I think was rather wealthy in the neighborhood and was responsible for one of the small flea markets. He had a lot of very negative things to say about him, and he said it in my presence. And I had to step up and say, regardless of whatever it is he did, first of all, you're considered innocent until proven guilty. Secondly, Ralph has done so much for so many people in this neighborhood. I don't think that you have the right to say that. You weren't there. You don't know what happened, so I think you better shut up. And he did. So,
One thing that I've been working with Corazon on the laundromat and thinking through what the story is. And one of the things that I'm supporting and that I'm really excited about is the idea of her as a Mexican immigrant talking about a Muslim family
right. I
who
thought it
came
was
here and who
wonderful.
thrived and like who's holding space for other people.
That's right.
And so when we talk about the president of the United States, who right now is saying Muslims are terrorists by saying that
Right.
this Ilan Omar, a
No,
congresswoman,
everyone has a problem unless you come from Europe. So that's really the bottom line.
right. So can I ask you, when you think about Ralph as a Muslim man in this neighborhood, in getting arrested, all these things, when we think about Muslims as terrorists, how do you wrestle with that and like what would you tell people who think about those things?
Well, I mean, there would never, I wouldn't have to wrestle with it because I know him and I know his family. And I truly I know his father. I know his brothers for the most part. His sisters didn't come to the store that much, but I know that his brother, one of his brothers, is a captain in, I think, in the Department of Corrections and started out in the police department. So he has very well seated people who are part of New York's government, I would say, and way of life. The only difference is that his father prays however many times Muslims pray each day. But I look at him as Ralph's father, not as the Palestinian. You know, Ralph is like just
Could, I
so.
mean, for people who think of Muslims as people who are criminals or terrorists or all this bullshit,
Yeah,
what would you say to those people about saying there's an example of a family, Ralph as a person that actually
right.
completely contradicts that narrative?
That's right.
If you could tell us a little bit more about that,
Well, first of all, I think because of them also being Muslims, just like people who I know are true Christians, the whole way of living and the whole way you treat other people based on how you were brought up within the religion of your background is positive. There was kindness. There was, in terms of treating neighbors or people who don't have as much as you, I saw charity. And it wasn't the type of charity where they look down their nose at you because they gave to you. You know, it was just they're able to do it and they do it. So I never had any other, never like a thought that, oh, they're Muslims
right?
and I'm not, or they're Muslims and they're a problem. I would think of them as American, as apple pie as anyone else, except they might use sumac for an ingredient in their food,
Yeah.
you know.
When you and one of I think that it was Eric who asked you. I heard about this. I wasn't there, but Eric asked you if you were to think about why Ralph belongs in the history of Fort Greene. Why does that man belong in history? Why does he belong in the history books?
Because he's touched
Just tell
so.
me, he belongs in the history
Okay,
books because
yeah, so Ralph would belong in the history book of Fort Greene. One, because he's been part of the neighborhood for such a long time and has touched so many people in so many different ways, whether it be just through them coming to his store and getting a chance to know someone from that background, where they would bring another flavor to the neighborhood. Another reason would be because of the many people he has helped, either through giving them food, offering them credit, helping them financially. It might be $100, it might be $5. So you don't find those type of people every day.
what, and so that's the person. When you think about Ralph's Bodega as being a part of history, why does that place belong in history?
Well, the actual place of 89 Lafayette Avenue on the corner of South Portland as a place, you would consider them to be in the historic books of Fort Greene just because they have been there for so long.
How long?
I think it's at least 40 years or more when his father started the store there. So his father's name is Jimmy Abdel Jawad, and Ralph is Ralph Abdel Jawad. So he actually was named, he's like a junior to his father. And um, you would see Jimmy, Ralph, his brother Bambi, his brother Neil, his brother-in-laws Kazi and Joey, who married his sisters, there every day in the beginning when I first, moved there. And his father, you would see him a lot of times outside the store, sitting in front, basking in the sun. He had like a swarthy complexion, and he might be out there eating an onion. And he would tell you that it's like, why are you eating an onion, Jimmy? He says it's good for your health. And you would see him, walking around the neighborhood, and that he would be upstairs in the bodega doing his prayers at, the times of day that they stopped to pray, as well as Bambi. Back then, Ralph wasn't really religious. But it was like anything else. It's like the Williamsburg Bank is a landmark in Brooklyn. So 89 Lafayette could even almost be considered a landmark. Like a lot of people went through that store to get, they make good sandwiches and or very, very good coffee. They've always made good coffee. So it's like a lot of different people would be going through the store, either neighbors, delivery people, um, people just walking through the neighborhood, because he would be considered, I guess, on the A side of the street in terms of business. So it's just someplace that everybody has gone to in the neighborhood.
Yeah. And so when you think, for example,
A lot of famous people too, like Citizen Cope is a very good friend of Ralph's, and I met Citizen Cope through my son, but also through Ralph's. There's another guy who was a singer. His name is um, I call him what do I call him? Wait 1 second. Um, co- um, um, damn, Tuck. Tuck started out around Rouse. He was a singer and he plays guitar. And you would see him there a lot as well. So, and a lot of movies were also made at Rouse. Like Girl on the IRT was made at Rouse. Um, I can't think of all the different movies that they used his store as a location.
cool, awesome. Um, when you defended him, when that went down and that man was talking shit about him, when you were defending him, that gut reaction. Tell me about the people in the neighborhood who came forward to defend him. What they say, how they
So,
react.
I mean, again, like, still, even back then, like Fort Greene did have a wealthy group of people living there. So and also politically connected. So there were several people who I reached out to and or reached out to me to start a Facebook page for him to be released, and a Facebook page. I think that somebody else created a blog. So there was an effort on social media to let people know who he was and the battle that he was facing.
Yeah, I think you know it would be nice in terms of a soundbite if you tell me a little bit about like yes, of course he got caught with weed, whatever. Like that's a mistake. We don't even like the legalization of weed makes that be like okay, what was the point? It's not even illegal. It's not.
Well, I mean, to me, it might have been a little bit more than that. And for whatever it's worth, it was a crime that he was arrested for. He he paid for in whatever way the government wanted him to pay for that crime, and he is back to a regular life. That has happened to a lot of people I know, black, white, Spanish, or otherwise, especially young men. Young men have a tendency to get into trouble. And so be it. They get into trouble as long as they do their time, they do their time, they come out and they've made restitution or whatever. Let them move on with their life. I don't even particularly care to really discuss it that much now because it's something that happened and and it's done. He did what he had to do.
Yeah, and the reality is what I'm trying to get on tape is the idea of like we all make mistakes.
Right.
Things
Exactly.
happen, life continues, and we continue to get better and thrive. But the reality that for the majority of his life, he has been somebody who has held other people.
Right.
That's what's really at the heart
That's
of what's
what.
important.
Yeah.
So if you could tell me that.
Yeah. The fact that Ralph has always helped people. He has not changed. He still helps people to this day. So the fact that he did get into trouble is like, so be it. He got into trouble. Let's move on.
Exactly. Is there anything else that you think when we think about making that place a landmark, a history place? Anything else that people should know about from your perspective?
Well, I mean, it's one of the things that I think people one of the things I think people should take away from Ralph 89 Lafayette Avenue, is family. It's a family-owned business. And what I love about it is that it enabled him and anyone else in his family who needed to make a living, to get a job, to be able to work there and make money. That's something that I never had in my family in terms of anyone looking out for the future of the legacy of the family. Having the foresight to buy property, to take care of it.
Great. Okay, so here's where we're at. I think that you have everything you need. The way that I would frame it is I would begin with the moment in which you moved, that the way it felt there in the neighborhood, the first time you walked into Ralph's, the way that like you moved in with your twins, and like the relationship of your family and your like the importance of family to you and the importance of family to
Yeah,
Ralph.
it's like Ralph's was a place that all my friends have been to. When I was working with somebody, when they would be coming home with me, we usually stop at Ralph to get whatever it was we needed. Um, the other thing that I think is very important to know about Ralph is that his him being motivated now at sort of an older age politically, in terms of speaking out against Trump and his motivation to create walls. Like he had put out a banner, "No More Walls." Last year, when it was Trump's administration who was tearing families away and using children, Ralph had a banner in front of his store against that separating children, holding children is being a terrorist. So I have to give my kudos to him for that as well.
Awesome. Again, tying it to family, right? Like if family is the thing, we begin with your family moving there, the importance of the safety of your family, then
Right.
going through as a family man, he supported you and he allowed you to get credit,
Right, right.
and then you built a relationship as friends. But then right now, when we're struggling and families are being divided,
Right.
he continues to support and speak out on behalf of those who don't have.
Right.
Even though he's gotten in trouble and like life hasn't always been peachy for him, things happened, the neighborhood showed up for him,
Right.
and still he continues to do what's right.
Right.
Beautiful.
Right. Okay.
You have it.
Cool. So now,
You know what I would do?
what?
I would send this recording to Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. He's around all day today.